Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Sue Kornbluth. I am an international expert in high conflict divorce and parental alienation. I help both parents and grandparents move through this very difficult part of their lives. And today I am pleased to present a training to you on what is ambiguous loss and why do targeted parents, grandparents need to know about this to cope with emptiness. Many of you may not know what ambiguous loss is, and we're going to go over that today, as well as provide you with different techniques to deal with the unbearable grief that you are going through at times in your life. This is no easy feat to get through on a daily basis, and it can go on for a long time. And one of the things that you are coping with often and on a daily basis is the feelings of emptiness. And so that is why I am very excited to present this to you today and hope that it will be a great tool to you in moving forward in this very difficult time. The first thing that we're going to talk about today is what is ambiguous loss. Many of you may not be familiar with this term. It actually grew out of soldiers that did not come back from war, and parents were having post-traumatic stress about this because they could not find their children's bodies after and during the war, and they still hung on to hope that their loved ones were still alive, and some of them actually were. And a woman named Pauline Boss did a lot of research on this, and she came up with the term of ambiguous loss, which you can see here is an unclear and unresolved loss that occurs without closure or clear understanding. And this is what many targeted parents and grandparents like yourselves are coping with on a daily basis. This loss that you are experiencing is unclear and it is not resolved. And there is always hope that one day you can become reconnected with your child or your grandchildren. So to grieve something or someone that is not dead is extremely difficult because there's always that hope inside of you that this can happen. And in many circumstances, it does. But going through the emotions on a daily basis, the anxiety and the fear and the depression and the hopelessness and all of these other feelings can cause you to feel a lot of despair. But there are things that you can do. And later in the presentation, we are going to go over them. They are proven solutions that have worked to help you cope with the emptiness that you do feel from this ambiguous loss. Now, this kind of loss, where it's unresolved, leaves a person searching for a lot of answers, and it complicates and delays the process of your grieving, and it often results in unresolved grief. So unresolved grief keeps going on and on and on because there is no closure with it. And that is often what you're experiencing when your children are not talking to you or they've tried to erase you from their lives. So some days you may feel completely sad or anxious or not able to cope with life. And then there may be a glimmer of hope. Maybe you received an email or a text or something, or somebody told you something about your child or your grandchild, and all of a sudden you start to feel hopeful again. These feelings are real, and it's okay to feel hopeful then. But then the process of grief is often becomes like a roller coaster. It's up and down and it's unresolved. And so how do you cope with that? How do you deal with that? How do you get through your days? And we will have more on that later on today. Let's talk a little bit more about the introduction that I just gave in terms of what ambiguous loss is and what unresolved grief is. First of all, many of us have experienced permanent loss in life. The best example of this is death, when someone dies. Now, of course, they can live on spiritually for you, but you cannot touch them anymore. You cannot hold them. You cannot hear their voice on the phone, so on and so on. So that's a permanent loss. And when we experience a permanent loss, it is never easy, but it is easier. It is easier to grieve that loss and go through the stages of grief to the point where you can move on with your day and not be bombarded constantly with whether or not your actions are going to bring back that person into your life. When we're dealing with ambiguous loss, it is completely unresolved. When we look and we think about parental alienation or grandparent alienation, there are things that may go through your mind, such as, I know where my children live. I know where my grandchildren are. I can drive there. I can knock on the door. I can touch them. I can see them. I can talk to them. But you also realize and recognize that if you do that and you go to the door, it may make it worse because you're invading their space and their boundaries, and so you go into almost a panic, and so does your body. Your body is where we store most of our feelings and emotions first before we're able to talk about them. And so that is where we are dealing with these feelings of desperation or emptiness. And we need to learn how to soothe ourselves from that, because there is always hope. And if we can live in a hopeful state instead of a depression one, we also can live our lives in a better way from that perspective when it comes to this ambiguous loss of the alienation in your life. And when we look at this in a bigger realm as well, we see that what is most devastating for people that are experiencing this ambiguous loss when it comes to alienation is that your children are still physically alive, but psychologically they are not with you. So that's what I've been talking about here, and that is the core issue of ambiguous loss, that you know that your children are out there. They're physically alive, but psychologically you cannot. It keeps repeating in your mind. Maybe you're ruminating about them. Maybe you are thinking that, your actions are going to change this on a daily basis. And it's very possible that it will. But the problem is that they're physically alive, but you cannot get to them. So you're living in this psychological torture day after day. Ambiguous loss can cause a lot of different emotions within you. Ones that people report the most are anxiety, depression, anger, yearning, frustration, panic, and other negative emotions, including helplessness, hopelessness, and emptiness. And I'm sure if you're listening to this right now, that you have experienced all or some of these that I've just mentioned. But one way to deal with this is to cultivate self-compassion for yourself. And we're going to learn about this later on in the presentation. There is a big difference between compassion for someone and self-compassion. And we will learn the difference later on. But no one, and please hear me very clearly when I say this to you, no one that I know or that we have worked with here at Dr. Sue and you have been able to move through this ambiguous loss without first giving self-compassion to themselves for what they have gone through emotionally due to the loss and separation from their children and from their grandchildren. It is just impossible to really heal that relationship with your grandchildren or your children if you cannot give some self-compassion and soothing and healing to your soul. And if you can do that, and if you can practice the tools and the techniques and the actionable steps that I am going to go over with you later in this presentation, you will feel much better on a daily basis that change is possible, that it can take place. But as long as we are focusing on what is wrong, instead of being able to focus on what we can create or what can become differently, we will find ourselves in the feelings of anxiety, depression, hopelessness, frustration, and negative emotions. And I know firsthand from hearing from you that this is extremely draining and it is extremely difficult to get through your life on a daily basis. But what we know from research also, if you can release some of this emotion, and remember here, I didn't say all, I said some, because it's impossible to release all of it. We feel what we feel, but if we can recognize it and identify it and label it and locate it in our body and be good to ourselves, then it becomes a little less difficult to get through. So we will learn some of these specific techniques later on today. And I hope, and look how I use that word because that's what I'm going to talk about right now. I hope that it will allow you to develop hope that things will eventually change within the course of the alienation and ambiguous loss that you are going through. Change is not always about reconnecting with your children or your grandchildren. That is the ultimate goal that we want to get you to. But change within yourself first, with your feelings, is the change that is needed in order to hopefully eventually have that opportunity to really get to that place where hopefully you can become reconnected and reunited with your loved ones. So right now I want to take some time and I want to go over the symptoms of ambiguous loss that you may be feeling because you do not have your children or your grandchildren within your life. These are often symptoms of ambiguous loss that many people going through this are experiencing. So let's start with the first one here, difficulty with changes and transitions, even minor ones. What I'm talking about here are just simple changes you may be having difficulty with in your life and transitions on a daily basis. Even getting up in the morning, that's a transition. Getting dressed, coming downstairs, getting your coffee and getting on with your day because your mind may be filled with repetition or repetitive thoughts about reconnecting with your children, how that's going to happen, when will you see your grandchildren again, so on and so on. Change of anything becomes very difficult for someone that is going through the feelings that you probably are suffering from right now. Making decisions becomes very difficult. A lot of people will talk to me about, I remember a story that this mother said to me that she was sitting in a store and she was buying a dress, and she sat there for over 2 hours and she could not decide if she wanted the blue dress or she wanted the black dress. And when I talked to her about that and I said, what was going through your mind during that time? And she said, I feel like I just can't make a decision about anything anymore because the decision that I made about my kids, it didn't turn out the way I thought it would. And so I don't know if I can make clear decisions anymore. So what's happening in your life with your children or your grandchildren carries on into your life on an everyday basis. You are not the person that you were before this happened, okay? But you can become, and I want to use that word a lot today, you can become a different and healed person over time. And that's what I want you to strive towards and think about as we go through all of this important information today. When we become different, oftentimes doors open up differently for us, and making decisions and trusting. Hear me when I say this. Trusting your instincts again takes time. Is this decision right? Is that decision right? When should I reach out to my children? How should I reach out to my grandchildren? What should I do? All of those things carry over into other aspects of your life. And once you can begin to develop more trust within yourself about the decisions that you're making again, it will definitely open up doors for you in many parts of your life and create a different feeling within you. The next one I want to talk to you about is, I'm sure, one that you probably have experienced as well. It's psychic paralysis, or the feeling of being overwhelmed when asked to make a choice. That goes hand in hand with making decisions as well. Oftentimes, when a lot of different choices are presented to you at the same time, it feels like you can't breathe. Well, that goes along with when you probably didn't feel that you could breathe when your children started pulling away from you and you weren't able to see your grandchildren, or when you began to try to reach out to your children and they were not reaching back to you, and you began to feel overwhelmed. And so what can happen sometimes is you just become almost paralyzed and you cannot make decisions because choices begin to feel so overwhelming for you. And that is where the techniques that we're going to talk about in a little bit are really going to help break you out of this feeling of being stuck or paralyzed. Because oftentimes you do feel stuck. I'm sure of it. I know it from talking to so many of you. Stuck that you're not moving forward in a direction of reconnection where you want to. And so that oftentimes makes you feel as though there is no hope of moving forward, but yet there is. There really is. Another thing that develops in ambiguous loss is learned helplessness and hopelessness due to a sense that you have no control over your life. When we feel helpless and usually, let me go back for a minute. When we feel helpless, the next thing that comes in line is hopelessness. Because when we feel helpless, we feel and think that there's nothing that we can do to bring change into our life. So that leads to the hopelessness. So in the case of alienation, we feel oftentimes helpless that we can't do much to change this. We try and we reach out, but we sometimes keep getting rejected. And then the hopelessness comes in. And this becomes a vicious cycle over and over. And so with that, you start to believe that you do not have control over your life. But I'm going to teach you later today that you do have some control over your life. You're not as helpless as you think you are, and that you don't always have to go to this vicious cycle of helplessness followed by hopelessness. There are steps in between that can lead you to hope. Probably what people go through the most from time to time throughout the time of being separated and alienated from your children or grandchildren is periods of depression, anger, sadness, anxiety, shame, guilt, and yearning. All of these feelings actually go together. In the beginning, you're very sad, and you're also very angry that this is happening. And the sadness can take you over at times and cause depression and anxiety. I know in my own work, I have heard from many people like yourself that there were days where you cried or couldn't get off the floor or were in so much pain and anxiety. And then the shame and the guilt come in. If I only did this differently, if I said this or I didn't yell or this or that, this would have been different. But everybody who is listening to this and everybody in the world sometimes doesn't always say the right thing, behave in the right way. And it's important that you recognize that and say that to yourself. Because when we blame ourselves sometimes for things that have happened, what ends up happening is we're not moving forward and looking in a more positive way to what we can do to create change here. You may also feel that you didn't do anything wrong, and there's many cases where you did not, and you still are feeling depressed and angry and sad and are filled with anxiety, because it's very, very difficult to be away from your child or your grandchildren, who are the most important human beings in your life. So all these feelings and symptoms that you are going through, I want you to know, are very normal when you're experiencing an ambiguous loss, such as alienation. It's very difficult for a person to resolve grief, because that's what we're in right now. It's unresolved grief if they don't know if the loss is temporary or final. I just want to remind you of that again, right? I'm talking about these symptoms and feelings that are going through you. It's not easy, and I'm going to be direct and honest with you. This is hard work to do this, but if you can work towards resolving some of the grief and managing the emotions that come up, some of these feelings will dissipate a little bit over time. Oftentimes, again, this can be difficult because there is a lack of clear symbolic ritual surrounding the loss. What that means is that there was no closure. And many times when your children or your grandchildren will say to you, do not contact me, stay away, I don't want to talk to you. That doesn't mean that that's really what they're saying, what they're feeling. They could be saying that because they're very hurt and they think this is the best way to deal with what is happening. People often push people away when they don't know how to resolve conflicts and they don't know how to verbalize it to the other person. So when they do say, just stay away from me, that's often because they're in so much pain. And I believe here that you don't just stay away when your child is telling you this, because There are so many times when they're saying that, but there's so many times where maybe that one letter that you wrote or the one thing that you finally come to the place and a light bulb goes off in their head and they say, maybe I'll try again here. So the issue is that there is not a clear ending to the loss. And so therefore it's very difficult for you to grieve it and move forward. One of the things that I think is not seen enough in this area of alienation is that you, the griever, are not socially recognized to others. What do I mean by this? What I mean is that a lot of times, if you're sharing your story with someone, somebody will say to you, oh, don't worry, they'll just come back. You need to just move on with your life. And that can hurt sometimes when you do hear that. And that's often from somebody that doesn't understand what alienation is and the toll that it takes on you. And this kind of grief, the ambiguous loss, is often not recognized as much as it should by the outside world. Death, which is final, is always recognized, right, as from other people. And that people are usually there for you and giving you compassion and kindness and supporting you. But in the world of alienation and this ambiguous loss that we are talking about today, you, the griever, is not often recognized as you are grieving, but you are grieving. And what begins to happen is you start to stuff down the feelings inside of you because you don't want other people to know what is going on in your life. That may come from many different things. One thing that comes to my mind when I think about that is embarrassment. But there is nothing to be embarrassed about here. This is a phenomenon. It is an epidemic that is happening to millions and millions of parents all across this world. And things happen to us every single day. None of us have gone untouched in this world. So I think when you can accept this to yourself and own it, that this is my life. I didn't ask for this. I didn't cause it, but this is what I'm dealing with. You will be much better able to handle the feelings that are going on inside of you that are not resolved. I can't remember who this is, but maybe it is Brene Brown. She is somebody that does a lot of research on shame. And she said, in order to release the pain and the emptiness that is going on inside of us, we have to be able to speak it. But please make sure that when you are speaking this to somebody, that you trust this person. Not everybody in your life deserves to hear your pain and your suffering. It's important that you share that with somebody that you really trust and you feel that can be compassionate to you. Grief is also often resolved, whether it's final or it's ambiguous, by having a support system around you to help you move through it. Whoops, let's see where we are here. Okay, so now we're getting into the meat of the presentation today. And I'm going to talk to you now about what you're going to learn. We're first going to go over techniques to reduce both of your internal and external conflicts of your loss. We're then going to talk about how self-compassion can help to reduce emotional stress. And then we're going to talk about developing hope for reunification. So if you look at this right here on the screen, it basically follows a 1, 2, 3 kind of punch. First, we need to learn what the techniques are, and then we need to look at what self-compassion is, And then when we have self-compassion for ourselves, we can really start developing some hope. And it's not always about just writing a letter to your child or your grandchildren. And I'm going to stress this again, because this is what I believe in, and I've seen the results. That if you are not in a place of somewhat emotional stability, meaning that you're in a place where you can let go of your anger somewhat, let go of your panic, let go of your fear, reaching out to your children to resolve this will not usually go as smoothly. They can actually feel where you are within your journey through this, even though you're not talking to them. Okay, so let's first start with some tips for coping with the unresolved grief. One thing that you can begin doing, which is very difficult to do, and lots of people that are going through this loss try to block out their pain, try to put it on the side, try to compartmentalize it. And sometimes you do have to compartmentalize it, right? When you're at work or you're at other places. But here's the thing that is really important: feeling your pain. If we do not feel our pain about this loss, then we are not allowing it to leave us and to put us in a better state, a better mindset to cope with what is happening and move forward. So I want to encourage you to really allow yourself to feel what you are feeling, no matter what it is. This is called vulnerability, everybody. Vulnerability, when we are vulnerable. And first, we really have to become vulnerable with ourselves before we can become vulnerable with others. And it is very difficult to do that and look within yourself. But the fear of looking within yourself and actually doing this work and feeling the pain is often scarier than actually doing the work. So it's the thought of feeling your pain. I don't want to fall apart here. I have to stay strong. But I think what many people don't understand is that by feeling the pain, you're not falling apart. You're actually becoming stronger. So denying your feelings, as it says here, only intensifies and prolongs the pain, instead of sitting down and really writing something to yourself about even what you're feeling. Research has shown that when we put pen to paper and we actually write a letter about what we are feeling, a huge weight comes off of us because we are releasing what is going on inside of us. We will talk about the writing of the letter a little bit later when we get to the self-compassion part of this presentation. Crying. I'm sure you've cried a lot. Tears of anger, tears of fear, tears of loneliness, tears of not knowing what's going to become. But tears can be very therapeutic as well. They cleanse us and they relieve the pain inside. I remember once working with someone, and it was peeling away at layer after layer of the trauma that had occurred with her not having her children in her life. And at one point, after peeling away so many layers, she began to tear up and cry. It was the first time that I had seen her cry in 2 to 3 years. And when the tears began to roll down her face, she stopped herself. And she said, "I don't want to cry about this." And I said, "I'm right here with you. I want you to try to let this out It's okay to cry. You're sad. This is difficult. It's hard. And crying is a way of releasing it. And I see this often in many of you that are going through this, that you want to stop the tears from coming. And what I'm saying is let them go. Let them flow through you. This is sad. And it's okay to cry. And it's okay to release the pain that is in you. First, you have to identify it. And then you have to sit with it. And then you can release it. This will cleanse you and relieve a lot of the pain inside. Once this individual was able to do that, she was able to cry and let go of the pain, and the layers began to peel back quicker. And she eventually was able to reconnect with her son. And she couldn't have done it before because she wasn't present and real with the pain that was going on within her. So I wanted to share that story with you to give you some hope here. Feeling our pain, feeling our feelings is never easy, but it is worth it in the end because it moves us forward. The next tip for coping with the unresolved grief is talking and sharing the pain that's inside of you. I talked a little bit about this before. It is important to talk about your feelings, even at the most difficult times, because sharing your grief will help diminish it. Holding those feelings inside, they eat our bodies alive. And what ends up happening is it causes a lot of stress in our bodies as well. We can get a lot of headaches or stomach pain or shortness of breath or pain in our neck and our shoulders. That is where you are storing all of the feelings of hopelessness and helplessness and all of those feelings that you are storing and have pent up inside of you. Talk about it. Use your voice to release them. Share the pain with a close friend or your husband or your wife if that's the case and you're dealing with grandparent alienation. Talk to a coach, talk to a counselor, talk to somebody, because the more that you hold in your feelings without talking about them and giving a voice to them, the harder it's going to be to cope with the grief. One of the things that is essential for people going through this is that you often feel that you do not have a voice in any of this. And that is true oftentimes, that nobody is hearing your voice, and I feel for you. That's why when I work with people like you and individuals who are going through this, that it is very important that you start to develop a voice for yourself. To begin doing that, you can talk to people that care about you and talk to them about what you're feeling. It's not always about getting advice from the other person. It's just talking it out and sharing what you're going through and getting some validation, acknowledgement, and support from somebody that really cares. That really does help with reducing the grief inside of you. Be kind to yourself. Wow, we really forget this one a lot on a daily basis, especially alienated parents. Oftentimes, alienated parents will beat themselves up over and over and over. And that's not getting anybody anywhere. Whatever has happened has happened. The past is in the past. And the time to focus on moving forward is now, in the moment. We can't bring the past back. So I'm encouraging you to be patient with your feelings, to be kind to yourself when you are having a bad day or a bad moment, when those feelings of helplessness and being scared and sadness comes up from not being with your children or your grandchildren. That is the time to not become angry, but the time to give yourself the self-compassion and the self-soothing techniques that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. It is very important to find a balance between the happy and sad person that you are, the anger and the peaceful person that you are, and the guilt and the glad self that you may be carrying around. Have patience with yourself. That is what is most important here. And some days you may have a horrible time, but the next day there's always hope that it will be better. But be patient with yourself when you're in these states of panic. Don't say to yourself, I have to put this back inside. I have to get over this. What that's doing is not helping yourself fill yourself up with joy or happiness. It's creating more emptiness within yourself. When we think negatively, that's what we get most of the time is negative things. Remember, your thoughts are just thoughts. Your thoughts are not reality. Your thoughts are thoughts that you made agreements with based on what has happened. So because you don't have your children in your life or your grandchildren, it's normal to make an agreement to be angry about that. But you can undo that agreement as well and make an agreement to be hopeful instead of angry. Remember to revisit your family roles and have a conversation with yourself that the role that you may be in moving ahead may not be the same as it was before. And this is a harsh reality for many people to envision or to become comfortable with. The change that has happened, and your role and your tasks in terms of how you may be in your children's lives or you may not be in your children's lives is going to change. And you need to take some time to carve out what those adjustments are going to look like and how you're going to manage this. For instance, if you do not have contact with your children or grandchildren and you are completely alienated, there are some things that you can still do. And so you can make an agreement with yourself that I am going to continue to send gifts, or I am going to write a letter every month, and I am just going to put these out without any expectations coming back, without any expectations. That is something that you can choose to do, that you can manage on your own, that creates hope for you. And that is what is also important, is creating hope for you. You can always hang on to your memories, the good times that you did have with them. That's also something that you have a choice over to do. Your relationships may change along with your identity as who you were as the parent, but there's things that you can hold on to and have some control over. And one of the things is the role that you are in. You can say to yourself, no matter if my children are talking to me or not, I am their mother, I am their father, and that is a role that is not going to change, even if they tell me that I'm not. Okay. The next thing that is important is to balance your thinking. Instead of thinking in terms of absolutes or trying to find a desperate solution, find a middle ground. So I hear this all the time. And I'm sure this has also come out of some of your mouths or your thoughts. This isn't things such as this is never going to change. This will always be this way. I've done everything that I possibly can, and this will never change. Well, that's the absolutes that I'm talking about. The absolutes are the nevers, and this is always going to be the same. When we operate out of absolutes, we're holding ourselves back from change actually occurring if it is going to. So I am a proponent for finding a middle ground. such as the statement that I wrote here below. I have the anxiety of no closure and also an opportunity to move on with my life in a new direction. No one can take hope from me of resolving this. And it's okay to give yourself permission to move on with your life in a different way. That doesn't mean that you are giving up or you're fully moving on. It just means you're giving yourself permission and an opportunity to become healthier from the trauma that you have been through. And when we can create balance in our life, in any circumstance, especially when it comes to trauma, we get through our life a lot easier in that way. And I just want everyone to know, I am not saying that any of these things that we are talking about today are easy to do. Nothing that is worthwhile in life is easy. But if we can do some of this when we're dealing with unresolved grief, we will live a much more productive life. You will feel better inside about what is happening, and hope will develop. I've seen it over and over. Hope will develop in many of your cases. And guess what? Miracles do happen. They do. Timing is everything in life. And with the continued hope that things can be resolved and taking actionable steps to try to make it happen, things do often change. All right, so now we are going to talk about what I feel is a game changer when you are coping with ambiguous loss when it comes to alienation. So for a long time when I started out in my practice many, many years ago, what we were doing was we were just helping individuals and alienated parents like yourself to just write letters and say the most appropriate things to your children to try to build a bridge to healing. But what I discovered over the years of doing this work was that there was a key factor that had been missing in moving towards that hope of this happening one day. And it was self-compassion. Self-compassion heals relationships. Compassion heals conflict. And so when you are going through something as traumatic as the loss of your child and then forcing and pushing you and erasing you from their lives without any explanation, or sometimes without any cause, it's devastating. And that devastation causes tremendous, tremendous emotional struggle within you. What do you do with it? Most people don't know how to comfort themselves. We don't know how to do that. We often look for others to give us that comfort. But what I have realized, and my team has realized, that getting compassion and healing and support from someone else is only half of it. When you're able to give that self-compassion to yourself, when you're able to talk to yourself and hold yourself and say, this is very difficult, and I love myself even though I'm going through this, and it's going to be okay. It changes the wiring within your brain. This is no joke. It does. And by changing the wiring in your brain, by self-comforting yourself, you are in a much better place emotionally to deal and cope with this unresolved grief. That's why I call it the game changer, because it is the game changer. Because without having this self-compassion, the other part of reconnection often doesn't occur. Hence, you must reconnect with yourself before you can reconnect with someone else. So compassion is giving without expecting anything in return. That is the definition of compassion. Self-compassion is kindness towards the self, which entails being very gentle with yourself, supportive of yourself, and being kind to yourself when you are in pain. And you are in pain. It is painful to not have your children in your life. It is painful to get through this every single day. But if you can recognize that to yourself and be gentle in the way that you're talking to yourself, over time, the feelings of anger and helplessness and hopelessness and desperation do decrease. Doesn't mean that you forget about your loved ones. It just means that you are able to be there for yourself to move through this. And that's what I said at the beginning when I was talking about self-compassion here. We must heal ourselves first before we can engage in healing conflict with others. There are 3 components of self-compassion. The first is self-kindness. And this means that we have to treat ourselves with care and understanding like you would a friend. So ask yourself as you're sitting here with me right now, if you were with a friend, what would you say to them to help them cope with the emptiness that they're feeling inside? Something that I would say is, I'm very sorry that you're going through this. It's very difficult. I'd like to give you a hug. I'd like to sit here and hold your hand and be here for you so that you can just talk to me and I can just listen to you. I don't have to give you feedback. I can just sit with you, be here with you. That feels very nice to me when somebody. So I'm asking you to take that and begin to say that to yourself. We all are suffering in some way. We talked about this before. You are not alone. Everybody that is in this forum today with us and the symposium are all suffering in some way. And so you are not alone in your pain. So shared human experiences can help ground you as well. Support groups are really good for that. We offer one at Dr. Sue and You where people that are experiencing alienation come together with other people that are going through it and they don't feel alone. And here's the thing, you're not alone. You are not alone. There are people and experts like us out there that really do understand what you're going through and can help you through this. When you choose to go through this alone, you're making a choice to not be supported by other people. And we know in the world that support helps us get through many traumatic events in our life. The other thing that's very important when it comes to self-compassion is observing your emotions without judgment or without trying to suppress them or exaggerate them. Judgment is a big thing. We often judge others in the world and then we end up judging ourselves. One thing I want to recommend is, look, I know that your children are hurting you by not having contact with you and keeping your grandchildren from them. But the more we judge them, the harder it will be to open up that door. When we judge other people, we're closing the door. We have to recognize too that they are also in pain and you are also in pain. And when we do that, we're not judging, we're just observing and we're saying to ourselves, everybody here is in pain and we all need healing. So what happens when you can develop increased compassion? Well, one thing that happens is that it increases your resiliency. And what is resiliency? Because let me tell you, you need a lot of resiliency to get through being an alienated parent or grandparent. In fact, I think everyone that is going through this is very, very resilient and strong. I mean, I think you're the strongest people that I've ever met to go through this in your life and to keep living your life. So I want you to know that. But increased resiliency is your ability to cope in difficult situations. And that's what I'm talking to you about today, that you can move forward in this unresolved grief and build even more resiliency. And right now, I'm teaching you some coping skills and how to do that. And the more that you can apply these coping skills to your life, the more resiliency you will build and the less emptiness that you will feel. You still will feel the loss. Don't get me wrong, that is not what I'm saying. It'll just feel different to you and not as powerful as the emotions have felt. Increased compassion also leads to greater motivation. So when you feel more supported by yourself, then it leads you to taking more risks or reaching out in a different way to your children or grandparents or grandchildren because you feel less emotional pain. And when we're in less emotional pain, we're willing to take more risks. And eventually, what we hope happens as this comes to some healing within you. And that's what we're looking for here, some kind of healing within yourself so that you can move forward and live your life the best to your ability. So a researcher named Kristen Neff came up with something known as RAIN. RAIN is a way to identify what you are going through and a plan, an actionable plan that you can go by to identify the emotions that you are going through and then apply the techniques that we are talking about. So I'm going to talk to you about this for a little bit now. The first thing she talks about is recognizing. This is clearly the most important step. You want to begin to name the emotion in your mind that you are going through, whether it's anger, helplessness, hopelessness, shame, whatever it is. You want to recognize that to yourself. Sometimes it takes time to recognize the feelings that we're really going through. But once we can recognize it and give a name to it and a voice, it does change things. The next step is to accept these feelings. Just to say to yourself, this is where I am. I accept that this is what I feel, and this is where I am. The more we fight the feelings, the more they persist. What we resist persists. So it is an experience you are having. That's what these feelings are. And yes, you don't like it, but it's the reality of what you are actually experiencing. And that is the reality. And when we can get ourselves to be within reality, that is also when it opens the door to healing. Now, when you are able to recognize and identify and accept your feelings, the next thing that I would like you to do is investigate with very gentle kindness, meaning I want you to become curious about your experience and what kind of thoughts are going through your mind. Meaning, why am I having these thoughts of depression or anxiety or helplessness? What is causing me to have these feelings? Where do I feel I'm lacking control here? These are some kind of questions that you can ask yourself. What kind of thoughts are going through your mind? Is it fear of the future? Is it fear that this is never going to change? Identify and investigate where you are. When we clearly look into the future and we say, what is going to happen? We don't know what is going to happen, but the minute that we ask what is going to happen, that word of what causes anxiety. So sometimes it's better to ask, how can I make changes within my own life to move this forward and cope with the emptiness? And finally, and most importantly, nurture yourself. Compassion, compassion, compassion. Kindness, love, and self-care, and non-identification. View emotions as a passing event, not something that is going to stay with you all day long. When a negative emotion comes into our mind, we tend to latch on to that, and that consumes us. But we can bring those things out of our mind too. Sometimes people even have to say stop over and over to themselves or delete just to remove the negative thought. When we give power to that negative thought takes power over us. So this is a great method to start. It will help you in terms of decreasing the emotions. Again, I want to remind you to treat yourself as you would a friend who is in pain. This is your mantra. And that kind of self-compassion of giving to yourself in that way will move you out of the emptiness into some wholeness. Now, we're going to wrap up in a couple minutes here, and I just want to go over some of the best self-soothing techniques that I have used with my clients that have really helped them to move to a much healthier emotional state. We're going to go over self-holding, self-positive talk, and journaling. Let's start with self-holding. This was something that I was taught many years ago that I often use when I'm in a lot of emotional pain and trauma or I'm missing someone in my life. So you want to find out in terms of where in your body most of your emotions are stored. Some people it's in the stomach, some it's in the heart, some is in your shoulders. Wherever that emotion is coming up for you with this unresolved loss, I want you to identify it. And then I want you to close your eyes and sit there in a quiet place and notice what you are feeling after you place your hands in that part of your body. I like to place my hands over my heart, and I like to sit there and I take 3 breaths in and out. And I put my right hand on my heart first, and then I put my left hand over top. And I sit there and I breathe. I just sit and I breathe in the calmness of the breath and letting it go. And I'll do that maybe for about 5 minutes. And at the end of the 5 minutes, if you do this on a daily basis, it will reduce the feelings of emptiness and the stress that you are under. Another good thing to do in the self-holding is often to hug yourself, putting your arms around yourself like I'm doing, so that you're actually hugging yourself. Touch, and even your own, feels very, very comforting. And that is what you need to get through this painful time. The other thing that we touched on a little bit today is negative self-talk. That is something we do not want you to do. We want positive self-talk. Positive affirmations change the way you feel. So if you're having some negative talk right now, and these are just examples, I am stupid, I'm not good enough, this will never change. There are negative things that you're thinking right now. I understand why you're thinking them, and I understand it clearly why, but it's not helping you to move forward and decrease the emptiness that you are feeling. Positive talk replacement is things such as, I made a mistake and it's okay. I am enough and I'm worthy. This is not permanent. The more you say the positive talk, the more you will feel at ease. And that's what we're talking about today. We're not focused on today exactly what you can change in terms of reconnecting with your children or grandchildren. What we're talking about today is you, because you are extremely important in all of this. And if you're not there for yourself and you're not there to comfort yourself, the next steps of moving forward, even if you've tried already, are going to be more difficult. Journaling is an amazing tool. At the beginning, I think, or in the middle of the presentation, I talked a lot about how putting a pen to paper feels like you're really releasing something, and it does, because the brain is actually saying you're releasing this by writing it. So I'm going to take you through this, how you can do this. I'd like you to get a journal. It can be a notebook. It can be whatever makes you feel calm inside. And I want you to sit down with the journal, and I want you to bring awareness to the painful emotions that arose during, maybe you had some self-judgment, or the painful emotions that came when your child told you that they don't want to talk to you anymore, or the painful emotions that you're going through because you don't know what you did and they won't tell you for this to be where it is today. And I want you to sit down with a pen and paper and write about it. Write about how you felt in that moment. Write about how you feel now. Write about the sadness. Write about the shame. Write about being frightened, stressed, or whatever is coming to you. And as you write, try to be accepting and non-judgmental of your experience. When you are non-judgmental of your own experience, it's going to help you to have compassion for not only yourself, but also for your children and grandchildren that are going through this. I don't want you belittling yourself, though, or making it over dramatic. I want you to be upfront and honest and vulnerable about what you're feeling. Take some time to look back on your past experiences. Be kind to yourself and look through a lens of the 3 components of compassion that we just talked about, that Kristen Neff came up with: the self-kindness, the common humanity, and the mindfulness. And I want to remind you that you are allowed to feel these feelings because you are in pain, and that is okay. But what is even more okay is recognizing these feelings, identifying them, processing them through, and giving yourself the validation that you deserve, that you did not get from other people when you're going through this. Validate your feelings. Don't run from them. You have the courage to face them. I know you do. You're not alone. Move forward. Do not sit in the past. Create a new relationship with the people around you, with yourself. Living in the past only adds to the suffering. What we have now is the present moment that we're living in, and we want to make those moments the best that we can, so that hopefully those moments will lead to change in the future. What we believe here at Dr. Sue and You, and what I believe when it comes to alienation situations, is that you can become the solution to any conflict within your life, but it starts with healing yourself first. And I hope that today I gave you a lot of hope that you can move through this. And some of you may reunite with your grandchildren and your children. Some of you may struggle to. But what I know for sure is that the emptiness that is inside of you may not heal completely, but with the techniques and the tools that I've given you today, it sure will help you in the journey of healing and bring you to a place of some kind of resolution within yourself, that you can get through this life, and you will. Thank you so much for being with me today. I am Dr. Sue Kornbluth, and you can contact us at 267-261-8462 anytime to ask any questions or concerns that you have. There is my website and my email that you can also reach out to us as well. Don't ever give up hope. Hope can never be taken away from you. You are the only one that can take that away. And I hope that you do find a path of healing as you move through this very difficult journey in your life. Thank you so much.